Hello there, guys and gals. This may well turn out to be a longish video. Yes, nothing I can do about it. It is what it is, and we've got to try and explain things properly and fully in an abridged manner. So I'm going to answer a question here, which is coming from Jonathan, who's one of my patrons. But please don't think that you have to be a patron of mine to ask a question and get it answered, because I love all you nice, lovely YouTube channel subscribers and viewers of my channel to ask questions that I can do videos on to answer, because it's food for the channel, and yeah, it's more identifiable with my general YouTube channel of viewers, and you're not waiting for me to come and make a video for you on some random thing that I've picked. So it'd be good for you guys if you actually ask me things. Yes, I'll shut up now. So this question is coming from Jonathan, and Jonathan bought my autofocus guide, and but he says here he's still unclear on something. For birds in flight or similar subjects, I also use dynamic 9-point AF, which is a good idea, but bear in mind he's on a Nikon, yeah, and it is my favourite way of photographing birds with Nikon, but it does have its drawbacks, and we'll come to that in a minute. Now, for those of you who are Canon users, and if you're a Canon user, I do strongly recommend you watch this video, if for no other reason than when you get to the end of it, you're going to feel one of the smuggest bastards on the face of the earth. Yes, you are. So, to get back to Jonathan's question, but he says he's never been convinced that he understands the relationship between the primary focus point and the surrounding ones. This is when we're using a dynamic area on Nikon. Jonathan uses a D4S, so his dynamic areas are 9 points, 21 points, and 51 points, or whatever it is. Now, Canon users have got dynamic areas as well. They're known as AF point expansion and AF point surround. There might be another one that's a little bit on the bigger side, but there is a problem with autofocus points, because the more you have active, in other words, the bigger the group of autofocus points you have, the greater is something called shutter lag. And shutter lag's something you need to keep away from, and I'll explain that in a minute. So he doesn't understand the relationship between the primary focus point and the surrounding ones. So what we're going to do in this video is to sort of discuss the merits of auto point switching, how it works on Nikon, and or how it doesn't, and how it works on Canon. I'm going to try and keep it brief, and but it's not going to be a brief video. So the first thing I'm going to do is just minimize Jonathan's question here, and we'll come to this shot here. Now, we've got a sequence of 20 shots running along here of this particular white-tailed seagull, which I shot a few weeks ago over in Norway. And there's 20 shots, and this first one, if we look at the timestamp, is 6:55:02. Alrighty, and the very last one in the sequence is 6:52:04. So 6:52:04 back to 6:52:02. 2 seconds, 20 frames, 10 frames a second. Okay, so that's a very short time span and a lot of action. Okay, so if we just go and have a quick look at these images at 100%, and I'll quickly cycle through them. So that's sort of sharp. That one's somewhat sharper. That's pretty good. That one's okay. That one's okay. that one's it's a little bit soft, but it's not from autofocus. I'm using a constant 1600th of a second shutter speed here, and really and truly I should have been at a 2000 or a 2500th, so I'm getting a little bit of motion blur, just a fraction, but it's enough to put the focusing off, or well, the sharpness off, not the focusing, the sharpness. So we've got that one, that's not looking too bad. That one's not looking too bad. It's not 100% precise, but you can see around the talons, that's a big shortcoming of that 1600th of a second shutter speed. We've got the next one, that's not looking too bad. That's okay. It's a bit of a crap shot, and you can see by the thumbnail or navigator view that I'm actually going up because I'm on an unstable platform. I'm rising up on the boat, and the bird's not rising up, the bird's staying down. So this is your problem when you shoot on an unstable platform. You've got relatively semi-unpredictable movement from your subject, but you've got totally unpredictable movement from you, and that is transferred into the camera. And then if you're using a big lens like this or this, as you go up, the sort of camera's wobbling around, and it is a nightmare. And no, VR, vibration reduction or image stabilization, will not help you one iota in that respect. So move along. That's not looking too bad, and that's not looking too bad. Still relatively in focus. That's relatively in focus. Well, it is in focus. That's in focus, but it's just starting to climb out now. And just again, that 1600th of a second shutter speed's not doing me any favours there whatsoever. We're maintaining focus on the head, even though the wing primaries have come in front, but it's not, that's not looking too bad, but it's becoming a bit crappy composition because the bird's now turning away from me. Still in focus, but crap because he's turning away. Same thing there, same thing there, same thing there. Now then, if I come back to the first frame, I'm going to fire up a plugin for Lightroom, which you can get very easily by going and downloading it and installing it off the internet, and it's called Show Focus Points. So what we're going to do is show the focus points when it decides to, and there we go. And so you can see here that I'm actually using dynamic area 21 point. Now then, in Jonathan's question, he said he was using dynamic 9 point, and I previously said that I do generally prefer to use dynamic 9 point because there's less shutter lag on 9 points than there is on 21 points. So, it is what it is. However, with Nikon, and what I'm going to do is fire up the internet, and this is where Canon users will start to realise how fortunate they are with the 61 point reticular AF system and the controls that they've got over them. And for Nikon users, I'll go through those in a minute. But if we look at Jonathan's camera manual for AF mode, AF area mode, we can see that 9 point dynamic, choose where there is time to compose the photograph or when photographing subjects that are moving predictably, runners or race cars on a track, 21 point dynamic area AF. Choose when photographing subjects that are moving unpredictably, players at a football game. Now, there is a slight problem here when it comes to these instructions, and they give you these cute little pictures which aren't real, they're just overlays. They give you these cute little pictures and they always feature people, yeah? And this is where wildlife photographers can come severely unstuck. If I come over to Lightroom again, temporarily, And I'm just going to close that plugin because I'm just going to come to these two pictures here. Now here we've got two shots taken on a Nikon D4 or D4S, I can't remember which one, with a 500mm prime, like that. And this one is a horizontal or landscape mode, as some people like to call it. Picture of a grey squirrel. It's grey squirrel, red squirrel, red squirrel. And it is completely uncropped. It's straight out the back of the camera. Opened up in Photoshop, and you can see the approximate focus distance is 562 over 100, yeah, which is 5.5 meters basically. And if we come to the next one, here we've got a 6 foot tall human being. Well, he's supposed to be a human being. He's one of my son's mates. And again, photographed at exactly the same aperture on this lens, on this camera, straight out the back of the camera, not cropped, full frame. Alright, and you know, top and bottom of the frame wise, we've got pretty much the same percentage of subject to frame height, or pretty much the same ratio of subject height to frame height. And you can see the approximate focus distance there is 501 over 10, in other words 50 meters. So to get the same composition with a human being, yeah, as you get with something like a little small red squirrel, then you know, it's 10 times further away. Now for any given aperture, the further away you are, the more depth of field you've got. And depth of field does mask autofocus errors, okay? So I'll just hope you've got that lodged in there, because that always has very, very serious implications for wildlife photographers, where it just has major beneficial applications for sports photographers. Yeah, wildlife photography and sports photography are two entirely different things. So just remember that when you watch all the promo videos for the Sony mirrorless cameras with the big white telephoto glass on the front, because you only ever see them photographing American football matches, don't you? Well, football matches or sports events. You don't see them photographing cute little furry red squirrels. So to temporarily come back over here, these birds are probably around 20-25 meters away. They are a big bird. I mean, you're talking what, a meter, 2 meters, 2.5 meters, 2.5 meter wingspan. Yeah. However, tallness wise, they're not even a meter tall, not when they're in flight. So to get them in the frame with a horizontal frame, to get a good composition, they need to be a lot bloody closer than a human being, and that goes for virtually all birds in flight. You are dealing with much less depth of field, therefore much less, or a far smaller ability for depth of field to hide autofocus errors. So autofocus errors are more prevalent and more visual in wildlife photographs than they are in sporting event photographs. Alrighty. So before we go on and have a look at point switching, I just want to say one thing. I hear a very frustrating question all the time, and it's, oh, how fast is the autofocus on that camera? It's a bloody irrelevant question. I'm not going to go into a diatribe as to how autofocus works. For that, you can go and download my autofocus guide. I'll put a link in the description below for that. The one thing you should be asking yourself is, how fast is the lens? And this is where I have a problem with Nikon. I don't have a problem with Canon, because they don't lie to you about this, but Nikon do. The speed of the camera, the phase detection unit, and the way it interacts with the autofocus processor shouldn't really be of prime concern, because that autofocus processor sends instructions to the lens on where it needs to be focused and how fast it needs to get there. Now, for the lens to follow the instructions from the autofocus processor, it uses a positioning motor. So this is where we have a problem. This is a positioning motor. It's a micro motor, and it's a bag of spanners. It's as cheap as chips. And it's just got a little nylon gear on it, which engages with a fixed tooth ring on the internal focusing group, and it just moves the internal focusing group backwards and forwards. We then come to this option here, which is nothing more than a micro motor stuck inside a gearbox. Now then, this is a gearbox made of fundamentally plastic and nylon gears. And the thing about gears is, when gears interlock like this, they have little gaps in between the teeth. So no matter which way you go, because they are straight cut teeth and they're not synchromesh gears, they have a tendency to rattle, and that rattle is commonly referred to as backlash. Now, all straight cut gears have a certain degree of backlash. When those gears are made out of a soft wearable material, I've got a yellow warning of rain. But when those teeth are made out of a soft wearable material like plastic, the more use they get, the more backlash they develop. Backlash in an autofocus positioning motor results in inaccurate positioning and lower speed. The third type of autofocus motor is this, and it's commonly referred to as a ring motor, and it's only got two parts to it, so it's a lot more precise, a lot faster, and a lot more reliable. Not prone to wear. You've really got to do something bad to break one, and however, they are very, very, very expensive. Now, this is where your problem lies. If you're with Canon, you know whether your lens is fitted with one of these, because the lens usually has USM stamped on the front of it. But if you're a Nikon user, you will think you've got one of these, because it will be classed as what Nikon call a silent wave motor. The only problem is Nikon also classed that as a silent wave motor. So this is where I have a problem with Nikon. And Nikon, will you please stop lying to your customers? For God's sake, publish a table on your website, or be more explicit in your descriptions of each lens to say whether they've got one of these silent wave motors in or one of these, because there's a lot of people out there who assume they've got one of these but have actually got one of these, and their lens cannot do the same, or cannot achieve the same level of performance as a lens like that or a lens like that, which is fitted with one of these. Nikon, it's wrong, and you've been a bunch of bastards. People who use Nikon gear are not privileged, much to the contrary of what you seem to believe. You really do need to stop lying, fess up, grow a pair of big kahunas, and suddenly change your tack and be honest with your customers. Because I see so many people who try to emulate, I won't say what I do, but they try to emulate what the big top wildlife photographers do, and they can't, and they don't understand why, and it's simply because they're trying to use a lens that has got a slow and more inaccurate autofocus motor. And God forbid then you get people who just don't know any different, and some of them have got those in. Oh dear, terrible. But anyway, that's my little sort of semi-rant over. Just make sure you know what motor your lens has got before you try doing this sort of really high demanding work, such as this high speed bird in action, bird in flight photography, because it is really and truly, especially if you're on a moving platform, it is possibly the hardest thing that you will ever, or the hardest task that you will ever set your autofocus system on your gear. Now then, to get back to Jonathan's original question, if we just go and look at Canon for a moment. Now, Canon operate with these cases 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 and 6. We're currently in case 4, and if you get hold of a Canon camera and you cycle through the different cases, the only thing you will see on the screen that changes is this value here for tracking sensitivity and this value for accel decel tracking. And there is a very, very strict relationship between tracking sensitivity and accel decel tracking. But fundamentally, for non-Canon users and for Canon users who don't quite understand this, tracking sensitivity can be seen as a brake or a resistance. When I say a brake, I mean like brakes. Brake or resistance to major change. Acceleration, deceleration tracking can be thought of as a brake or a resistance to minor change. There is a fundamental difference between what the camera sees as a major change and what the camera sees as a minor change. And this doesn't just apply to Canon, it applies to all cameras with an autofocus system. But the Canon system allows you to customize the tracking sensitivity and the acceleration deceleration tracking sensitivity, and customize it and tailor it to the situation that you're in. Now, for people who don't quite understand that or understand what I'm talking about, that's why Canon give you these 6 cases. But if you understand tracking sensitivity and accel decel tracking, you can actually force your camera to do some very, very spectacular tricks with autofocus. However, you can't do that on a Nikon, no. But we'll come to that in a moment. We also have this third control, which is AF point auto switching. It's the one at the bottom. And you can see we've got 3 settings for that. Now, 0 is normal. It's not off, it's normal. 1 is faster and 2 is really fast. So you can dictate how fast your primary AF point in a dynamic focus group is switched to one of the other surrounding points, because you can't maintain tracking of that one point on the spot that you follow it as your subject moves along. So the Canon system is very, very, very versatile. Now then, if we come to the Nikon system, and I can't really show you this because my D4 is away at the doctor's, and yeah, I feel naked without it, but that's neither here nor there. But the Nikon system, if I switch over to the controls for, say, the D5, we have this thing called focus tracking with lock-on, which we've always had on Nikon cameras. And it's always been more of a block shot response. Now with the D5 and the Multicam 20K system that they've got on the D5, D500, etc., they've now tried to emulate the Canon system. They've put this subject motion, erratic and steady, on as well, which is a little bit like Canon's accel decel tracking. But as you can see, it's only got 3 points of adjustment where the Canon's got 5, and so it's not quite as tailorable. but we're still missing the auto point switching. Just to come back to the old Multicam 3500 system and the D4, D4S variants, especially more applicable to Jonathan and Jonathan's question. We have this focus tracking with lock-on facility, which, as you can say, could be roughly conceived or construed as the equivalent to Canon's tracking sensitivity. But fundamentally what this means is, if we are focused on a subject at X distance and another subject transects our line of sight to our subject, does the camera try to grab focus on that new subject? If we have focus tracking with lock-on turned off, yes, it will. If we have it turned up to long, 5 maximum, no, it won't. However, because we haven't really got a way of separating on the old Multicam 3500 system, we haven't really got a way of separating major changes from minor changes. What focus tracking with lock-on does, it tends to stop your camera from changing focus at all. So there's the thing. Sometimes this is useful, and I may do a video showing you why sometimes that is useful, but normally I shoot with it either turned off or on 1 or 2 at the maximum. It's nice that you can turn it off, because when you are photographing birds against a cloudless blue sky and they've got no other background behind them, then turning it off really does make your autofocus system as fast as it could possibly be. Going over to the new system, I don't know whether 1 is off or it's comparable with 1 on the old system, which means it's very short, but it is still operational. So I don't know. I haven't got really enough experience with a D5 or D500. I don't need a D500, so I haven't got one. And the D5, well, quite a lot of you are aware of my thoughts on the D5, not the camera I've ever wanted to own. Anyway, I think I've covered that. Oh yeah, before I get on to the AF point tracking, AF point switching, I just want to mention this about shutter lag. Now, I can't find anywhere published a lot of shutter lag information for either a Nikon D5 or a Canon 1DX Mark II. I'll find all the information for a Nikon D4 and D4S, and I can find all the information for a Canon 1DX. But you can see a 1DX with 61 point auto area, that's all the 61 points turned on, working as a massive group. The shutter lag time is 221 milliseconds. Doing the same thing on a Nikon D4S, the total shutter lag time is 288 milliseconds. Now then, if we take this whitetail seagull, which is in this case coming head on to the camera, really the hardest thing to do for your autofocus system is keeping up with that. That bird's doing about 10 meters a second. That's roughly the average speed at which a whitetail seagull cruises, which is 22 miles an hour, which is 10 millimeters per millisecond. You've got a shutter lag of 288 milliseconds. So the bird actually travels 2.8 meters in between the time you tell the camera to fire the shutter and the front curtain actually opening. That's if you're using all the autofocus points. So if we were to go over to the old interweb again, if we were to use 51 point dynamic area AF on a Nikon D4 or D4S, then that's the amount of shutter lag we're going to have. And that extra 2.8 meters of travel of that whitetail sea eagle has got to be figured in to the predictive autofocus algorithm. Otherwise, your image, when you take it, the lens is going to be focused behind where the subject actually is. You can see that 21 point they recommend to use when your subject is moving unpredictably. Yeah. What that fundamentally means is, because you've got no control over your auto point switching speed on Nikon, and you've still not got it even on the D5, because you've not got control over it, they put the faster auto point switching on the 21 point dynamic area AF, and it is the auto point switching is slower on the 9 point dynamic area AF setting. So to me, that is completely arse about face. For people who don't understand what that means back to front, backwards, because we've got 21 points active here, so this has got a greater lag time than 9 point. Yeah, crazy, because it's got more than double the number of active AF points, 21 point. So it just seems ludicrous to put the faster auto point switching on the greater lag time AF dynamic mode. It just seems completely backwards to me. And of course, Canon shooters don't have that bloody problem at all, because Canon shooters can go and put their auto point switching up or down at will, no matter what autofocus mode they're in. Just seems crazy. So yeah, I bet you Canon shooters are feeling really smug now. And I can't say I blame you. But anyway, to get back to these shots, I'm just going to fire up that plug-in again, which you, as I said before, you can download off the internet and go and install. It's slow, it sometimes crashes, but it's useful. So I'm using, as I said before, 21 points, and I'm using the center point. That's the active point in the middle of the viewfinder. In other words, I've not used the AF point selector, the little joystick, to make the composition handed. I'm using the center AF point because this column here, or these three columns here, are all cross-type sensors with an f4 lens on, like this, because this is the very lens that this picture was taken with, or this sequence of pictures was taken with. We are using the faster point switching mode here, 21 point, which you'd think, right, we've got a moving subject and I'm all over the place with the camera, so you'd think the next shot it'd be using this another point. But if I move over to the next shot, it isn't. Well, it's not loaded yet. You just got to wait for it to load up there. And there we go. It isn't. But I mean, that's a sensible thing, because that's a high contrast edge, so the phase detection unit can get a good read on that edge. Now then, the only thing is, this is a 2-second burst. If I jump, because we've not got time to sit here and go through all these, because it'll take forever, and this video's long enough as it is. But what I will tell you is, for the first 50% or the first second of this 2-second burst, that point never moves. It should do. Oh yes, it should do, because the shots are actually all over the place. If I just jump forward and go and load that one up, as you can see now, it's still using that point, that center AF point, and it really shouldn't be, because I want it to track over here, the lighter part of the subject. If I jump all the way up to here, you can see it's still using that center point, doesn't change. If I jump all the way over to this one, Now you can see this is the first shot in the sequence where it decides to switch points. Why it switched to that point, I don't know. The 21 points that are being used are this group of 15 here, plus that one, that one, that one, that one, that one, and that one. Those are the points that are within that 21 point group. Now if I move over to the next shot, now you can see it's jumped back from there to the primary selected point. If I move over to the next one, it's still on the same primary selected point. If I move over to the next one, now you can see it's moved all the way over to the left hand side. Why that is, I do not know, but well, there you go. Go to the next one, and now you can see it's jumped and started using this cross type sensor up here. Go to the next one, and now we've moved again. Go to the next one, and now we've moved again. Go to the next one, and we're back to the primary AF point again. So I'm going to close that plug-in. You know, I mean, it is what it is, kids. So in answer to Jonathan's question, I've just shown you what the relationship is and how the auto point switching works, because it is automatically switching points. But as you can see from that sequence, out of that 2-second sequence, for the first second or first 50% of it, the first 10 frames, it didn't move. Now sometimes if you shoot at a much slower frame rate, you'll see it begin to move earlier. That's my experience on Nikon anyway. But on Canon, it moves. I mean, I use a 1DX Mark II pretty much as standard, with auto point switching either set to 0 or to 1. And that's plenty fast enough. You know, when you can shoot 40 frames on a Canon, and 38 of them will be using a different AF point. It's very, very, very efficient. Nikon, not so much. I liken the Nikon, especially the Multicam 3500 system, I liken it to something that's quite agricultural. Yeah, it does the job, but you will get dropped shots with it. The experience I've got with the D5, it's better than the D4, D4S, but it does some really strange things. And the sad thing is that the Canon system never does anything strange. Well, it does occasionally, but it's not the norm. Nikon system, poor performance in between subsequent frames is quite a common thing, whereas on Canon it isn't. And this is why I generally prefer to use the Canon system. Not because it's better in terms of how the autofocus works, because it isn't. Both Nikon and Canon autofocus systems both work exceptionally well. The only thing is, when you get in an awkward, difficult situation, the Canon system is far more customizable. It gives you greater flexibility, and really and truly it is about time Nikon caught up. It really is. I'm one of those people who's in a rare position, who's pretty much equally experienced on both Canon and Nikon platforms, and I've been for a long time. And there's just something about the Canon reticular AF system that is just it is just tailorable so much so that it does leave the Nikon system with something to be desired. But anyway, and that really does go for the newer Nikon 20K system as well. And it's simply because they refuse to give you access to auto point switching control. So, Jonathan, your question was highly relevant, and it is a very, very important point, which I don't think I've ever seen it discussed anywhere on the internet. No, I don't. So, anyway, there we go. And I'm just going to leave you with one thing. I have no idea how long this video is, or it's going to turn out. But, say this is our subject. This is where we're going to start photographing it. And this is, 100 metres away. And we're going to focus it. We're going to photograph it continually at 10 frames a second as it comes towards us. If it's moving at 10 metres per second and we're photographing at 10 frames per second, that's our first frame. When we take our second frame, it will be a metre closer. A metre closer at a starting distance, or at a previous frame distance of 100 metres, means it's 1% closer. If it maintains a constant speed along that track, when it's 10 metres away, we'll take a picture. A tenth of a second later, we'll take another picture. But it is now a metre closer, so it's 9 metres away. However, the previous frame was 10 metres distance, the new one is 9. It's still only moved a metre in between frames, but that metre is now 10% of the previous frame distance. So that is now no longer a minor change, it is a major change. So a 1 metre change at 100 metres is a minor change. On Canon, that will be controlled, or the camera's response to that will be controlled with accel-decel tracking. That self-same change, when the bird is 9 or 10 metres away, will be controlled with tracking sensitivity, because that is a major change, because it's only 1 metre away. So the fact that you've got a customizable autofocus response, or tracking response, that's tailored to both major and minor changes, gives you greater tailorability of the system to cope with that little swing area in this subject's path where a minor change ceases to become a minor change and becomes a major change. Sound complicated? I bet it does. I don't know how better to explain it, really. But anyway, I really hope that, Jonathan, that's answered your question, or given you at least some food for thought. And anybody else who's been watching this video, I hope you've got some useful information out of that. So until the next time, tooroo.